Awesome. Cool. Well, good evening. Thank you for being here. I'm Abraham Calhoun, your spiritual coach for professionals. And this is Working with That Person You Hate, a specialized Peace with course designed to essentially help give us the skills to manage our emotions, but also work well with others when others are experiencing a lot of emotional reactivity in the workspace and or maybe causing some challenges. So working with that person you hate. I always like to start off with a little bit of a story about the inspiration behind this class and why I decided to develop this. So as an Aries, I am known sometimes for my dominant and assertive energy at times. And so there was a period in my life where I was leading a team of individuals, and I had a goal, I had a mission. This is what we were going to accomplish. And there was one individual on my team who I essentially considered a bad actor. They were almost like a spoiler, if you will. There was just constant negative feedback coming back from them, no input. They weren't solution oriented. There was always an issue. There was always a problem. And one day I let my frustration get the best of me, and I, kind of lashed out and was like, at the end of the day, you can just leave and like get out if you're not going to be helpful. Obviously, it wasn't the right move for me in that moment. And as soon as those words left my mouth, I had this memory of like, Avi, you are a specialist in conflict resolution. Like, that like that is not how to react. Like you know these skills, but the reality is we are all reactive in some ways, shape, or form. And so I convinced her to have a one-on-one meeting with me, and I decided to, conflict resolution 101. Where are they at? How are you? How are you doing? Switch it on them, give them the energy, give them the attention that they need in that moment. And really, they started to open up with me and shared some experiences that they were going through. For example, they were in and out of the hospital with one of their family members, and they were the primary caretaker. On top of that, they had been given several other duties that I didn't know about from another seniority level in the organization. And so there were a lot of things happening because there was a lot of miscommunication. And in that moment of reactivity, when I lashed out, I really fractured our relationship. And so it took a lot of time for me to rebuild trust with this individual. And the way it started was by me kind of pausing, checking my own petty behavior, checking my own reactivity, and really allowing that other person to share with me the experiences they were having. Of course, conflict resolution takes time. It's something that we have to be willing to put in work to do if we're trying to build better relationships. But ultimately, Peace With is about bringing peace to the workplace. And we do that primarily through the relationships that we have with other people in the space. So that is my story. And I always like to start out with an icebreaker of some sort. And so if you, I would maybe do this with like leadership teams, if you have them, or tight knit. Of course, you don't want this to become like a bashing session, but I think it's important to address the elephant in the room. And I think it's really important for us to start talking about the experiences we're having in work that are leaving a negative impact on us when we go home at the end of the day. And so the question that I want to pose here that gets right to the point, and feel free to share in the chat or come off mute if you feel open and wanting to do that. You don't necessarily need to, is what is some of the most toxic and or petty behavior you have experienced in the workplace? So you can take a second to think about it to yourself. If anyone wants to come off mute and share, feel free. If anyone wants to type in the chat, feel free. But I'd love to get a few examples from those of us who are here tonight if you're open to it.
Avi, I can start.
Oh, please, Rachel, thanks. Go for it.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things is that mentality of me, of just I before the team. So
Mm.
focusing on the individual, focusing on them. If it was me being the problem child, me, what's going on with me? How is all of these changes impacting my workload, impacting how what I need to do on a daily basis instead of looking at the larger picture of the team, working as a team.
Yeah, absolutely. That tunnel vision is a real thing, and it's actually something that I'm going to address here in just a few moments. So I think for me, the hardest part, especially as a facilitator and a leader, during the pandemic, when I was working with teams, it was the facial expressions on Zoom, because I think people forget that they're on Zoom sometimes, and like you can see everything, and then like me trying not to take things personally, and like all of these, so like it's that kind of thing of like recognizing like when you are in a group of people, like body language and facial expressions are something that send signals to people. And so I think it's really important for us to just be aware of those things. Awesome. So now this is where conflict resolution and spirituality gets hard, because we have to flip it, right? Because if we're ever going to talk about the external world, we need to talk about the internal world first. And so this is a question, we're not going to answer this as a group, but something to keep in mind, something you could maybe journal about on your own or talk about is, what do you think your most toxic and petty behavior is or has been in the workspace? And then potentially looking at, okay, what was the cause? How can I work through that? And we're about to jump in. So just kind of like framing these things. And I can hear this going over not so well with some of the more traditional leadership that I've experienced. But again, I think it's important for us to start being honest and talking about the experiences that we're having in the workspace. And there's a way that you can have these conversations without pinpointing specific people and or making generalizations and whatnot. So moving on, here we go. Perfect. Next slide. So this is the real problem with the workforce right now. The great resignation of the 2020s. This is something that I've been researching since the pandemic and constantly interested in. And this major research paper from MIT Sloan came out that was basically looking at, okay, we've noticed since 2020, there has been an insane amount of individuals leaving the workforce, seeking new jobs. There's been constant transferring, high turnover rates. There's a lot going on. And when they started to actually look into what are the root causes of these things, it actually turns out that this toxic and petty workplace behavior is actually coming more from environments that are being created first. So I think it's important for us to actually define what a toxic and petty workspace looks like and feels like. And so you can read some of the list. I'm not going to go through the entire list, but for example, you have no room for mistakes. There's constantly negative gossip happening. There's a high turnover rate. You have fear-based shame. And this is my favorite one, sick guilt, especially as a teacher. People do not like, for teachers, there is a huge amount of sick guilt that goes into, obviously you're not wanting to give up on your kids, but like sometimes you get sick. When I was teaching in Brooklyn, I basically was told, this was before the pandemic, by one of my principals that if it's not the flu or you're not running a 102 fever, then you need to be at work. And it was just kind of like, that was such an insane mentality to have for people's health and well-being. So we really are experiencing a lot of negativity, a lot of negative environments in the workspace on a daily basis. And so I'm just curious, as you look at this list, what have been your experiences, if any, with some of these types of environments? Feel free to share in the chat or come off mute. And if no one wants to share, that's totally fine too. I just want to give space just in case there is any, how are you reacting to this? What are you thinking? Have you experienced anything like these before? And yeah, just want to open the space up. Cool. Well, no worries. But I think what's important for us to keep in mind is when we are experiencing environments this way, something in the chat, fear-based shame. Yes, former administration. Yeah. Fear, oh, we have another one. Almost all of them. Exactly. Sending a reprimand and letters in the middle. Okay, yes. So I'm picking up that this individual is definitely in the education sector. So that fear-based culture is something huge in the education system. I experienced myself, and also with some people that I've worked with, I've also heard from it. But these are common experiences. These are common environments. So what we then need to look at is, if you've got these kinds of environments, what are the behaviors associated with these environments that like create kind of a cycle? And so they then started to look deeper into, okay, we have these environments. What's actually creating the environment? Well, it's this aspect of belittling, yelling, bullying, manipulation, gaslighting, right? All of these different types of behaviors, many of us have probably experienced in the workspace. And honestly, if we're honest with ourselves, we've probably also been, I don't like to use the word guilty, but we've probably also enacted some of these behaviors as well. And so I think it's really important for us to be able to define these things, because there's, from what I see on the internet, like TikTok, Instagram, there's a lot of like, oh, my workspace is so toxic, or oh, this sucks, that sucks, but there's not a lot of defining going on. And I think what we really need to do is start to pinpoint specifically, like, what is the behavior you're experiencing? What is the environment you were experiencing? Because by defining things specifically, we're able to develop more proactive solutions to solve those problems. So now when we take these two things side by side, where you're looking at the workplace environment in tandem with the behaviors, you start to see that they're related. So for example, if I'm in an environment where I'm constantly being micromanaged, there's probably going to be some level of annoyance and frustration that leads to groaning and eye rolling on a daily basis, right? If I'm working in an environment where there's low morale and negativity, you're potentially setting up a space for a lack of personal responsibility. I mean, this place is already so negative, so why do I even need to be better anyway, right? Like getting rid of complete and autonomy from the self. So I think it's important for us to note that oftentimes, most of the time, if not always, behaviors are not occurring in a vacuum. They are occurring because environments exist. And so it's very important for us to be able to define these specific things. I want to pause here and offer and ask if there's any questions or any revelations or moments of sharing that anyone would like to give before I move to the next slide. So now let's start to look at some of the statistics related to the Great Resignation of the 2020s. Oh, cool. Yeah, I think it's really good. Got it. Right. I see. So what someone wrote in the chat basically saying like, it's very good to be able to reflect on what you're contributing to the space, i.e. like, what is the type of energy I'm bringing into the space, I think that's what I'm picking up. Correct me if I'm misunderstanding what you've typed. So yes, okay, perfect. So when we look at the Great Resignation of the 2020s, these are some staggering statistics. Employees are 10.4 times more likely to leave their role if a company is experiencing just one of those type of environments I listed. So that wasn't even like all of them. It was like, if one of these types of environments exists within that workspace, we're noticing that employees are 10 times more likely to leave that place at the end of the day. Right now, this is a US specific, 70% of employees in the United States who left their role post 2020 said it was due to a negative relationship or relationships in the workspace. So we're really noticing from a lot of this HR research that's happening, like, of course, companies want to turn a profit and make money, but at the end of the day, relationships are one of the biggest hindrances right now as it relates to keeping staff. And then further, 40% of global workers post 2021 are considering leaving their jobs due to workplace stress and or negative environments. So as career individuals, for me personally, there's a lot of responsibility that I'm wanting to take, like, to make this better for people. Like, let's create a more positive environment that contributes to more positive relationships in the workspace. And of course, you can't control everybody, but I think what's missing is a lot of the wisdom that I'm hoping to share with you this evening, not necessarily from me alone, because I could never do this alone. Of course, the teachings that I get come from research, they come from my studies, and they also come from a lot of the spiritualities that I've studied throughout the world. So this is not all my own thinking. I've just organized this in this way specifically. So now I want to talk about the formula of workplace doom. So you start with a petty and toxic environment. And this is kind of like is it the chicken or the egg? Like, which one came first? You start with a petty and toxic environment, plus petty and toxic behavior is going to equal intense negative emotions, plus a lack of self-control and a lack of situational context equals increased emotional reactivity, which then contributes to that toxic environment that then continues to spiral down to the behavior, then to the emotions, then to acting on those negative emotions. And we kind of create this cycle of just negativity in the workspace, all because of one thing. And it really is emotional reactivity. This is something that we need to be talking about on a daily basis. What happens to us when we're experiencing these strong negative emotions? We have tunnel vision. And on the call earlier during our icebreaker, Rachel was sharing her experience with this kind of like, I'm only thinking of myself. And it could be for many reasons, right? But like when you're experiencing stress, when you're experiencing negativity, you start to get your blinders on. And it's a normal biological response. I think that's what people need to understand. It is the fight or flight system that is biologically built into us. You can go back to it was either in the last class I've talked about this either in spiritual hacking or in the last class I taught. But if you want to know more about what I'm talking about there, reach out to me and I'll be happy to share you information more about that biological reactive system. So you've got this tunnel vision. Then what happens is your emotions start to control your behavior. And then those emotions, when you react to them, feed similar emotions to the other person. So if I'm coming at a situation like I was when I told my story at the beginning of this, where I was inserting my dominance, my power, and my frustration, it only got me more frustration and anger from that individual, right? And that's something that we need to understand, that when we are not in control of our emotions and we choose to react with a negative emotion, that is more than likely going to result in another negative emotion. So we really can be the conduit of change when we're working, even with people who are difficult to work with, by controlling ourselves. Any questions about the formula of workplace doom? Great. So do we have bad people or bad behavior? And I chose the name of this class this evening partly because I like to kind of pick harsh, like I wanted it to stick out, really jump your face. The reality is people are not the problem. Bad behavior influenced by negative emotional reactivity and a lack of situational context is what's creating our problems, right? So here's some tips to live by when experiencing emotional reactivity. The first one is always separate the problem from the person. This is something that we were constantly told when I was working in peace building in the Middle East was you've got to always separate the problem from the people, right? Because what we start to do in our minds is we start to associate the negative emotions. We start to associate the negativity with the actual person. The second thing we need to do when we are in contact with difficult and challenging people and/or emotionally reactive people is we want to make sure we're checking ourselves. Ask, are my emotions manageable, risky, or out of control? And if it's not manageable, then you probably need to pause for a second, and really work that up. And then finally, we really have got to start influencing a culture of learning and asking open-ended questions, a culture that really seeks to understand, not a culture that seeks to demand or a culture that seeks to tell, but a culture that seeks to understand. So these are 3 specific tips that come from Roger Fisher and Daniel Shapiro, who are 2 world-renowned negotiators, from business negotiations to hostage negotiations. They really talk about these 3 main things being key to any sort of negotiation that is involving intense negative emotions and or situations. I'm going to pause here. If there's any questions, let me know. Feel free to raise your hand or put in the chat. Now, I did want to pose this question. When we are in conflict, what do you think is going to be our natural response in order to resolve the issue? When we are in conflict, what do you think our natural response is going to be?
Defense.
Can you say it one more time? Sorry, I think it cut.
Is it defense?
Defense.
Acting from a defensive position.
Yes, exactly. Right? It's natural. It's so human. It's biological. We see it all the time. We instantly put up defensive walls. I'm under attack, so I need to protect myself. I need to protect my reputation. I need to protect my resources, whatever it may be. So let's move on then. What do we do, right? So here is the spiritual solution. And that spiritual solution is the Peace With process. So the Peace With process starts with something that I call quantum cause. And really simply, it's seeing a bigger picture, being a positive cause, and knowing your value and your purpose. So the first part of this is bringing awareness to your dimensions of the self. So we need to remember, if you're looking at this picture with me down here, you see this big wheel. On the outermost ring, you see something called organizational dimensions. And some examples of this are my management status, union affiliation, seniority. Then you've got your external dimensions, which are things related more towards personal choices, the things that I have chosen in my life, but are still central to me, like my marital status, my work experience, my religion. And then the further we get into the self, you see internal dimensions. Now, internal dimensions are very interesting because these are unlikely to change through your lifetime, but they do have, they're not as influenceable as the 2 outer rings are. So, for example, your age changes, but you can't control the change of your age. Your race generally doesn't change throughout your lifetime. Your gender, while it can be changed, it's something that is intrinsic to you, that you feel internally. What we need to remember is that all of these dimensions of the self are driving the way I see the world and how I behave towards other people as it relates to their dimensions coming into contact with my dimensions. So it also influences how other people see you. So for example, if we're talking about organizational dimensions and there is a conflict between 2 individuals and the seniority between them is different, that is obviously going to influence how they see each other and how they respond to each other. And so we want to make sure we're bringing awareness to these aspects of the self. From there, we want to recognize if I'm being a cause or am I an effect? Am I allowing this negative experience to control me? Or do I recognize the way I'm feeling, but know that I have the ability to work or to cause something to become more positive? So this is where it gets really interesting, because energy without restriction follows the law of affinity. So what you put out is what you get back. And we just kind of talked about that on that slide where we went over some of those skills, is we have to remember that emotions beget emotions. So if I'm putting out anger, I'm going to get anger back. And so not only is this something that's been studied in conflict resolution and proven cause and effect is a real thing that we see in international trade, it's also been a spiritual teaching in many different traditions throughout the world. What you put out is what you get back. So am I wanting to be a positive cause or am I wanting to be a negative cause? And then the final part is purpose and value. So this is something that I think is underneath of a lot of things. And I don't know that we're at a level yet where we realize how important it is to talk about purpose and values in the workspace. For years, I'm not gonna lie, like I had tension with my own leadership, not because I had necessarily bad leadership, but because I slowly started to realize that I am not doing something that is aligned to my purpose and my values, the things that I really feel like I was born to do on this planet. And so because of that, there was always this tension with my job because I could never go 110% because it didn't serve me well. So when purpose and value are out of balance, there's always going to be tension. So this is something that you want to be aware of. Like when you're experiencing people who are negative in the workspace, this could be a big indicator or a big part of why they're feeling those ways. And what we're realizing is 50% of employees actually seek new jobs due to unfulfilling workspaces. It's not like an unfathomable statistic, but almost half of the workforce out there, like the reason they're finding new work is because they want to be fulfilled. They want to feel that purpose. They want to feel that light that shines in them. So all of these things are at play. Quantum cause is really gaining the awareness of this world. It's a zooming out. It's helping you see things from a bigger picture in its most simple way of saying it. Are there any questions here about quantum cause? Perfect. Okay. Next slide. From there, we want to move into what we call the spectrum of desire. And so where quantum cause is about perspective, desire is really about gaining control of the self. So it's balancing desire, it's controlling emotions, and it's defeating egoism. So what we really want to do when we're using this spectrum is determine if our intention is rooted in a negative desire or a positive desire. Does what I want only serve me? And so I like to talk about this as it relates to the three forms of desire. Like any energy in the world, there has to be some sort of balance. So our desire that we feel on a daily basis, that the thing that gets us out of bed, that we want to do I want to drink coffee? Do I want to go for a walk? Do I want to do this project? X, Y, and Z. It's all desire. Desire is the energy that is driving us constantly. We don't think of it like energy because it's really weird to think about like, oh, my thoughts, like they're energy. It's like, yes, everything in this universe is energy. And it's a finite amount of energy. So it's constantly being transformed. So when we're talking about human beings, we obviously have our physical energy, but we also have mental energy. It's our consciousness. What are we doing with the way we're thinking and speaking? So on the right, you have the desire to give. On the left, you have the desire to take. And in the center, there's this desire to restrict. Now, if you're thinking about a light bulb, what makes a light bulb work? Well, you've got the positive charge on one side that's putting energy out, and you've got the negative charge on the other end that's accepting the energy. There's something happening in the middle, though, which is a filament. It's that restriction part. It's channeling the energy from the right side, restricting it in a way so that the left side can actually receive it in order to make the light shine. But you get rid of that middle part, you get rid of that restriction, you have a short circuit, right? It blows up. So, for example, if I'm leaned too far to the right, too far to my desire to share, I'm going to deplete my energy because I'm just giving all of my energy away. If I'm leaned too far to the left, that's where we're looking at tunnel vision. It's only about me. What do I do? What am I doing? What do I want? Right? So we need to always keep restriction in mind. The restriction is what starts to allow us to actually control behavior. So, looking at these three things, I want to take us to a scenario. And I want you, as you're thinking about this scenario, if you can visualize, I'll pull it back up on the screen in a moment. I want you to visualize kind of like on the left side, you have complete, utter desire to take. On the right side, you have the complete, utter desire to share. And in the middle, you have this kind of balancing act, the desire to restrict energy. So, scenario 2. You have just been approached by a client interested in working with you. You know that a few months back, this same client was working with one of your coworkers, but then decided it was not the right time to buy the product. The client told your coworker they would come back in a few months. The other day, you and this coworker had a small tiff because they got coffee for several others, but did not ask you if you wanted any. So you confronted them about it, and they acted like it wasn't a big deal and told you to calm down. Now the client has come back to the company and directly reached out to you to work with. If you decide to work with them, this could be the biggest commission you've ever made, but you know your coworker will find out. When you hear this scenario, naturally, where do you think your desire is going to be? Is it going to be to take the commission and run, desire to receive, or is it going to be thinking about the other involved? If you want to write in the chat like what your initial response was or what your initial thought was, I'd love to see. Nice. I love the honesty here. Natural desire to receive. Absolutely. Right. And that's I love that this person said naturally too, right? Because it is a natural response to protect the self. And so this is kind of something that you can do in the moment, like when you're in those challenging conversations and you're starting to, maybe we get a little bit tight and we're like listening, but like we're thinking like, okay, I'm preparing what I want to say next. Like that's where you need to say, pause. Where's my desire right now? Like, what am I really do? Am I only wanting to serve myself, or am I wanting to actually serve both of us in this moment? So this is where we start to actually gain the beginning of self-control. Any questions about the spectrum of desire? Cool. So I'm going to move on to the final step of the peace with process. Pardon me. There we go. Which is right kavana. So quantum cause is your mental work. It is getting the perspective of the situation. Spectrum of desire is where we start to develop the self-control capabilities. Right kavana is the action. Now, this word kavana, it's a Hebrew word. And the reason why I chose to go with this word is because what it means is direction, to direct one's energy in a positive way. And so it felt inspiring. Like right kavana is always about directing our energy in a positive way. So when we look at right kavana, what we're talking about is developing a mindfulness, developing consciousness that keeps you focused on being a positive cause, setting cause-driven goals, setting goals that are directly related to your purpose and your values. And those can be organizational or personal. And then finally, getting outside of the self by doing acts of service. So in order to act in an ego-restrictive way, we must have an increased consciousness, right? That is quantum cause. Then our intention must be rooted in the desire to share more than the desire to receive. Notice that I didn't say only the desire to share. So I like to think of it like this: the desire to share, the desire to receive for the sake of sharing. How can I get more so that I can give more back? It's a very important concept to have. And then finally, your actions must be supported by the first two must-haves mentioned above. So ultimately, this is what's going to help you fight those natural ego responses, is by developing more consciousness to actually control yourself in these moments of intense emotional reactivity Now, I also paired with right kavana 2 specific actions because I did promise ways to have challenging conversations, as well as setting boundaries and some negotiation tactics when dealing with those who are more challenging with us. So I call this peace with feedback. And we've all heard of the classic I feel statement before. I feel blank when this happens. Well, I've kind of added to it and made it a little bit more specific to help you jumpstart. So before I'm having any challenging conversation with anybody, whether it's my partner about daily matters at home or people at work, I'm wanting to make sure that I am preparing myself. Any good negotiator will tell you that before they go into that negotiation, they have written down specifically what they're trying to achieve and what they potentially think the other person is trying to achieve. So it's kind of doing our mental homework before we go into those challenging conversations. And this can be used that way. So the first step is to control emotion, right? And this is going back to Beyond Reason, the negotiators who were telling us, check if our emotion is risky, out of control, or managed. From there, if our emotions are manageable, we're ready to start step 2, which is state the feeling. Oftentimes, when we talk about feelings, I'm so angry today. This happened and that happened. And I'm so upset. I'm frustrated. I'm sad. I'm this. We associate ourselves with the emotion. But what we need to remember is that our emotions are part of our reactive system. So, yes, we can have good and positive emotions, and we can have negative emotions, but they're part of our reactive system. It's not necessarily coming from the true self. And that is a whole nother topic that maybe that'll be the next class. What is true self? But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're stating specifically, I feel this way, because what it's telling us psychologically is that I am not this emotion. I am not attached to this state of being, right? So I feel frustrated and angry. The other thing that you run into, I oftentimes, well, tell me what happened. How are you feeling? I just feel like they weren't listening, and I feel like all they ever want to do is do their own thing. It's like, okay, well, none of that was feelings. You were talking about actions, right? So we also want to make sure that we're really defining emotions in these moments. So after step 2, after I've stated and defined the emotion that I'm feeling, now this is where we get into writing the movie script the cause to limit blame language. So what I mean here is to write like an omniscient person, someone that is not attached to your own reactivity and someone who is not attached to the other person's reactivity, like you're a fly on the wall. So when I receive an assignment with a large time commitment on the same day as the deadline, when I receive an assignment with a large time commitment on the same day as the deadline, because I do my best to prioritize and choose the tasks that need to be completed in a day ahead of time. So if you pair it together with that I feel statement, what you're actually getting is I feel frustrated and angry when I receive an assignment with a large time commitment on the same day as the deadline, because I do my best to prioritize and choose the tasks that need to be completed in a day ahead of time, right? So you're giving kind of like, you're still using the word I, but instead of saying, when you give me an assignment on the same day, when I already have all of these other time commitments that you've put on me, it gets really hard. See how we're not using blame language in this moment? So that's a really important step when you are talking with people who are negative or overtly reactive. Do your best to limit blame language in that moment. And then after you have stated the context, then you state your expectation. In the future, I ask for at least 24 hours heads up if an assignment needs more than 2 hours of my time, or I'm given support to help accomplish the task. Now, many of us would just stop there, right? And that's a mistake, because all of this, even though we're still trying to diffuse tension, step 1 through 4 are pretty selfish. It's about me and my own experience. Step 5 is the really important part, where this is where we start to say, how does this sound for you? Do you have any other suggestions? How can I work better with you, right? coming at it together. Like, we're in this together. We're not against each other. We're against this problem together. It's a very, very important part. Are there any questions about the Peace with Feedback process or the Peace with Feedback loop? Awesome.
I have one.
Yes, please.
So a lot of this is, it sounds very self-driven, for maybe an employee to kind of give to a manager if they're feeling frustrated with it. It's something. Do you have any advice to kind of tailor this, or how would you rephrase the script that you kind of have outlined here for a manager to an employee to try to say, "Hey, I know that you're frustrated. Let's see if we can't work something out."
Right. So I think with that conversation, if I'm trying to get, it depends. If there's a specific problem that you're trying to address with the employee, you need to go head in, right? And I would use the same thing. I feel a big one that I've heard a lot is the word concerned. Like, I feel concerned that there have been X number of missed deadlines. In the future, I hope that they get in on time. Talk to me. How are you feeling? What's going on? How can we be more supportive? Right? Because you still want to hold them accountable, right? Like, we have to remember that accountability is important. And if people have a job to do, they need to be doing the job. But instead of coming at it very much like, hey, Sally, you've missed your 5th deadline this week. Like, what the fuck is going on? Like, right? You can say that, or you can say, hey, Sally, I want to talk to you. I'm feeling a bit concerned. I have noticed that there have been some assignments turned in past deadline. And in order for me to meet my quota, right, I need those on time. So I ask that they are turned in on time. But I'm curious to know, how's it going with you? Is there anything I can support in? You don't want to just jump into blame, like, you never know what's going on with Sally, right? So you want to give space for Sally to kind of like talk through if this is a first time offense, right? So if this is like a second time or third time offense, I would handle the conversation differently. If it's a first time offense, right, like, there should be compassion, there should be empathy there, because we're not sure. Now, once you start to get that full perspective, then I think that's where you can start to kind of tailor this a little bit more specifically and come up with a game plan. The best employee performance plans that I ever did were the ones where, quite frankly, I told HR to get out of the room and just said, listen, I know you have my back as a leader, but they don't trust you because they feel like you're a punisher. So give me 48 hours to like work on this issue with them, and then we'll come back to you if we need it. And in that moment, we ended up being able to come up with a good and clear action plan that we then took back to HR, and they presented it to HR, not me. So there was ownership in their own performance development plan. Oftentimes, you don't see that type of ownership, especially in large organizations where there's hundreds and thousands of employees. And hopefully we'll start changing that little by little. Was that a long question? I mean, a long answer to your question, but did it help you a little bit better?
Good. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Yes. So let's practice this feedback loop really quickly with a silly little, this may or may not have been inspired by my own household. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, kind of was. But Jamie and Jenny are roommates. Jamie is washing the dishes for the 4th time this week. They are annoyed because they are cleaning all of Jenny's dishes and had a long day at work. Jenny comes home and sees Jamie doing the dishes. Jenny sits down to have an after-work snack. Annoyed by their presence in the kitchen, Jamie snaps and begins yelling at Jenny that they do not do enough, and they are always the one left to clean up, and they want to move out. Jenny responds by yelling back and leaves the room by slamming the door. Again, negative emotion spurs negative emotion. So we're entering that cycle. So I want to be Jamie really fast, and I'm going to do Jamie in the way that Jamie should have approached this conversation. First, I'm having anger as Jamie. I feel frustrated as Jamie. Am I in control of those emotions? Let me do a 5-minute meditation first, get some control. Okay, now I'm in control. So let me prepare first. Here's how I'm feeling. This could potentially be the perspective of the other person. Of course, it's all assumed. All right, great. Now that I've done that and I've broke myself out of ego consciousness and I've got a better perspective, I feel frustrated when the dishes pile up in the sink and I do them more than 4 times in the week. In the future, I ask that there can be more balance between doing the household chores. And I suggest us coming up with a calendar or a checklist. How does that sound for you? What other suggestions might you have? Right? Now, of course, I just made it very robotic in that moment. But the more that you start to use this feedback process, it becomes more natural and organic. And it actually just rearranges the way about you go having conversations with people, whether they're challenging. So you can use this for like setting boundaries with people. You can use this for, any type of conflict that you're experiencing where you need to share feedback and or your experience for the first time. Any questions here? Perfect. We are moving right along. This is our last chunk here, which is a little bit more where, okay, now things are starting to get more challenging. Here are some negotiation tactics to use. So when we're talking about spiritual negotiation, we want to make sure we're defining like what that is. So there are 2 ways to look at negotiation. You've got a distributive negotiation, which is essentially winner takes all. I'm going to win, you're going to lose. And that's generally how a lot of the negotiations happen, especially in the international world, and also in business, especially when there is a power imbalance in the workspace, or there's a small group of people who are in power and the rest of them do not have power, right? And then you have something called integrative negotiation, or what I like to call spiritual negotiation, because it's focused on shared interest and wins. So I want to play this video really quickly.
What if you could generate a new income stream just by simply loading up some mini ebooks online onto Amazon? And
to give you a better idea of the distinction between the distributive and integrative approaches to negotiation, I wanted to tell you a little bit of a story. So let's imagine that you live in a world where, for some reason, there's a massive shortage of oranges, and you're sitting at home and find yourself really hanging out for a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice one day. So you decide to try your luck and you head to the supermarket, just on the off chance that there might be an orange left in the fruit section. You walk in the door, look over to the corner where the tray of oranges usually sit, and what do you happen to see? But one gleaming orange sitting there left in the tray. You quickly run over to the tray, reach out your hand to grab it, but just as you do that, someone else does the same thing. Now you're in a bit of a pickle. It's clear that both of you really, really want this orange, so you begin negotiating. Now, let's imagine first that you adopt a distributive approach to this negotiation, which is assuming basically that this is a competitive situation with a fixed amount of the orange for both of you, and your aim is to get as much for yourself as you possibly can. So you start off by saying to the negotiation partner, look, I've been hanging out for a glass of orange juice for months. I'll take 70% of this orange and pay 70% of the price. They say, no. I really, really badly want this orange. So how about I pay 60% of the price and take 60% of the orange? This goes back and forth for a while with each of you competing for the best deal until you eventually settle on a 50-50 split. Each of you pays 50% the price of the orange and gets half of the orange each. And then you go back to your house and you have your half glass of freshly squeezed orange juice, and it's reasonably satisfying. Not too bad an outcome. But let's rewind and imagine instead that you adopt an integrative approach to negotiation. Remember that one of the key aspects of an integrative approach to negotiation is the assumption that the parties who are involved in the negotiation can actually have compatible interests. Both of you can walk away with the thing that you want and achieve a win-win result. So let's imagine if at the beginning of this negotiation, both of you just asked a simple question of each other. What is your interest here? Not your position, because we know that the initial position is that both of you want the orange, but what is your interest? What do you actually want to do with it and achieve with it? And you say, well, I want this orange so I can use the flesh to make a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice. And your partner says, well, I have no interest in the flesh. I actually just want to use the rind, the skin of the orange, to make orange muffins. This exchange of information between the two of you at the beginning of the negotiation drastically changes the potential solutions. It's pretty clear that what you can do now is each still pay 50-50 for the orange, which is the same as the result under the distributive approach. But instead of walking away with 50% of the flesh, you can walk away with 100% of it and make a much larger glass of orange juice. Similarly, your negotiation partner can get all of the skin and rind of the orange, not just half of it, and make many more orange muffins. This is a really, really basic example, but it's helpful in illustrating the point that an integrative approach to negotiation can often result in vastly superior negotiation outcomes, with its emphasis on assuming that win-win results are possible and inquiring and understanding your partner's interests, not just their initial position. The integrative approach gives us a better chance of arriving at negotiation outcomes and making joint decisions that have an overall higher benefit for everyone involved.
Hi, I'm Jane Fond.
Oh, Jane Fond. So with integrative negotiation, in order for it to fully work, you need to understand those components of a conflict. But once you have those components of a conflict on your mind, then you're good to go, right? So first you have your issue, which is there was only one orange, right? Then you have their position. I need an orange, right? Now for the girl, she wanted to have orange juice. For the gentleman, he wanted to bake a cake with the rind. But because when they went into that negotiation, they were stuck on their position, I want the orange. They didn't even think about asking, well, hang on a second. What's your interest here? What are you hoping to achieve? Where are you trying to go? And just by simply asking open-ended questions, you can start to transform a negotiation from something that could have gotten you half of what you wanted to something that actually gets you both what you want. And it's all about the underlying needs that support that position. So whenever you're going into negotiation, or with a challenging person, or because negotiations, I don't think we realize are happening all the time. Like, there's a whole masterclass on it, but like negotiation is something that we do with our partners at home constantly. Like we do it in work constantly. We even do it in the grocery store. So asking myself, okay, if this is the problem, this is the position, why do I want that? And then it's usually that answer that starts to unfreeze me a little bit. Well, I want, in this case, I just want the juice. I don't need the whole orange, right? So distributive, it's this idea that winner takes all. It's full desire for the self alone. And it freezes you into fighting until you finally get what you want and all of what you want, or you don't get anything. It's a 100% me versus integrative negotiation that allows you to find options. How do you find the best options so everyone is happy? And if you're rising above the context, if you're seeing the interdependence in getting above the conflict and controlling your desire, you're going to be more likely to fall into this integrative spiritual style of negotiation. Are there any questions on this slide before I move on? Cool. So, some key takeaways, right? What is the problem that we're all experiencing? It's this great resignation in the workspace caused by the negative and petty workplace environment. Then this environment leads to toxic behavior. This toxic behavior fuels more emotional reactivity. And the lack of self-control with emotional reactivity creates this cycle that we continue to get stuck in over and over again. So what's the spiritual solution? Separate people from the problem. Use this peace with process to restrict your ego. Zoom out, become a quantum cause. Control your spectrum of desire. Figure out where you are. What are you trying to achieve? Is it for yourself alone, or is it for all of you? Are you trying to make the situation better for everyone? And then finally, right, kavanah. It is my intention. Do I actually want peace? Do I actually want collaboration? And then what are the actions that I need to do in order to get there? Use tactics with the intention of peace and collaboration. So I always like to end on a nice quote, and I thought this was a great quote that came out of a paper that I read, Dynamics of Fear in the Workplace. We believe that effective leaders must develop their self-awareness and understand who they are in relation with others in different situations, the impact that others have on them, how they impact others, and how each one's early experiences or dimensions of self influence all of those dynamics. So essentially just driving home that we need more self-awareness, because that self-awareness leads to more other awareness, if that makes sense. So just want to say thank you all for being here this evening and spending some time in this space with me. It was lovely to have you all here. If you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. If you're interested in any of the sources or slides or have just further questions, let me know. I'll be happy to share. And of course, we always have services. So if you have a workspace, you have a team, and you're interested in doing some sort of training like this with your team, let me know, because I would be happy to assist that. But I will stay on if there are any questions or anyone wants to talk through some of the things. I have a couple more minutes. But again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and have a great night.
Thanks, Avi. Great information.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.